April Fool's Day. Unfortunately, this one's not a joke. That school was closed until further notice.
Happy birthday, Mickey.
And Matthew had something to say. He wanted to wish who a happy birthday?
Mickey.
He wanted to wish Mickey a happy birthday today. So there you go, Mickey, happy birthday. But anyway, yes, school is closed until further notice, meaning we're going to have to make a few adjustments here in terms of grading and binder, possibly turning into like a digital binder that you just submit to me. I've got a plan with how I want to run with the grades. We just kind of need the school to come out with some official guidelines, however they want to do it. But I've taken a ton of online classes, and kind of the standard in place of testing would be kind of a book with a discussion board. It's not all that bad, but yes, people, you do need that book. So again, try to order it. A digital copy is fine. If you can find a PDF, that's fine. I know that you can still order it used on a number of different sites, but try to get this in your hands by next week. So let me know if you have any questions, if you have any major issues in trying to get it, or hopefully you were on the ball and you bought this thing early when you were supposed to. So anyway, that's kind of the plan, and I'll roll out grading guidelines as soon as the school gives me something official. But I think that we'll be okay in here. I can, easily have daily grades, just kind of the stuff that I do, and the majors would be more in the form of, an essay or discussion board or something similar to that. Matthew, do you have anything else that you want to say before I continue with my lecture?
I don't know what else to say.
You don't know what else to say? You want to just say hello, goodbye?
Hello, goodbye.
He says hello, goodbye. All right, people. So here we are, continuing our discussion on kind of Truman's presidency and the escalating Cold War tensions that were out there. And if you recall our weird memory aid, Truman's muscles brought nasty. Technically, you should remember all of those. Those have been covered to this point. So if you're looking at TMBN, T stands for Truman Doctrine. We pledge to fight anywhere, anytime, any place. We will defend non-communists and we'll go to war to do so. What's the M? Money, Marshall Plan. So Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan. B is the Berlin Crisis, and N is NATO. So just understand NATO, again, a permanent departure from our past isolation, and now we are in a permanent defense alliance that we're still in today. This slide is going to cover the C and the A. Truman's muscles brought nasty China across. Well, here's the A. Russia has the atomic bomb. In 1949, they test it. We honestly freak out when they get it. So they had spies in the United States. They were planning one. They successfully got one earlier than our intelligence actually thought. So this is kind of a freakout factor in the United States. And Truman takes a bit of a political hit when Russia is able to explode the atomic bomb. But in terms of Truman taking a political hit, probably the bigger factor is when China fell. So as you recall from world history, or hopefully you remember something about these names, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao, I'm confident Miss Fleece, Miss Mercer, any world history teacher would have taught you about the nationalists versus the communists and their, never-ending civil war that had been going on. We in the United States supported the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. They eventually lose to Mao Zedong. And you remember Mao, he takes the country totally communist, and Truman takes a political hit. Truman and the Democrats are then blamed for losing China. And you got to understand the consequences of this. That would be the several asterisk points down here. But if Truman and the Democrats are blamed for losing China, now if, say, any other country looks like it's going to fall to communism, Truman and the Democrats want to appear especially tough. So think about this down the road. Let's say there's a little country in Southeast Asia that might fall to communism. Now the Democrats are going to be there and be especially tough. And that is going to pull us into a lot of different fights. The notable one that I'm kind of alluding to is, of course, Vietnam. So we want to appear especially tough. We don't want another country to fall to communism because we have this belief that if one country falls, the next will, the next will, the next will. And it's kind of a a domino effect of every single country eventually falling to communism. So important slide here. Note our freakout factor when the Soviets get the bomb and the political hit for Truman and the Democrats when China falls to communism. In terms of the development of bigger bombs, the A bomb, if you remember that graphic I showed you guys on the lecture, it was big, it was catastrophic without a doubt. Well, now this one's 10,000 times bigger. So the H bombs, significantly larger. We get this by the early 1950s. The Soviets then get one in 1953. And this kind of Red Scare, this fear of communism, going everywhere, eventually leading to World War III. We truly are starting to freak out about this. And we feel there are communists within the United States. We think nuclear war could happen at any moment. So I'll kind of close today's lecture by showing you some pictures, and then I'm sure I'll link a video clip about our freaking out for these bomb drills and potential World War III. Quick note here on science. The 1950s were a very scientific decade for us, and a lot of the innovations in that decade are still felt to this modern day. Look at the first one. Hey, a computer. Now this computer, it's kind of funny. First IBM mainframe computer was the size of like an entire room. Today's cell phone is more powerful than an entire first IBM mainframe computer. But look at these scientific advancements. You got that, you got the hydrogen bomb, DNA. This is a big one, and I would always focus a ton on Jonas Salk and his vaccine that's tested for polio, because every single year that EOC test was given, that was a guaranteed question on there. Well, it doesn't look like you're taking an EOC test, so just kind of note, hey, Jonas Salk, vaccine for polio, now you know. Power plant, NASA's going to be created in the late 1950s. Maybe you know why NASA's created, late 1950s? The Soviets. They launched a satellite into space, Sputnik. We again freak out thinking that they're ahead of us, so we create NASA to catch up. So more on that in a little bit, but I think you should note a few of these scientific innovations in the 1950s. 5 years after World War II, sure enough, we've got another war. So this one involves Korea, and you kind of have to understand the aftermath of World War II. Japan had controlled all of this. Japan loses World War II, they have to leave, and then Korea is divided in half along the 38th parallel. This is notable. I would ask that you remember the 38th parallel. So it's going to divide it in half and try to somehow reconcile the two opposing political ideologies in Korea. In the north, they have Kim Il-sung, who's going to be communist, more aligned with China. In the south, Syngman Rhee, more democratic capitalist, aligned with kind of our ideology. So the weird solution is, oh, let's just split it in half and eventually the thing will be fixed. Yeah, that didn't work because the North invaded the South. It is a true test of our containment policy. And remember our pledge to help non-communists anywhere, anytime, any place? Well, this indeed is testing it. So communist North Korea invades non-communist South Korea. And sure enough, the United Nations is there to act. It's going to be kind of led by the United States, but technically this is a peacekeeping mission by the newly created United Nations. And we've got a military all-star just over in Japan. We send him to lead this assault. So this is the World War II super famous Douglas MacArthur, the I Shall Return Douglas MacArthur, who had rebuilt Japan. We're talking like the biggest name in the Pacific at this point. Everyone knew Douglas MacArthur. So he's going to lead the United Nations with a whole lot of American troops to try to defeat the communist North Koreans. That's kind of the cause of the war. So North Korea invades South Korea. That sparks it. We then send over Douglas MacArthur with the United Nations. Douglas MacArthur was a daring individual. And he wanted like this very bold attack to take out North Korea. So he lands, they say, in a really bold step at Incheon, which is behind enemy lines. And I know you can't really follow all these arrows all that well, But when North Korea invaded, they had pushed all the way down to here. So MacArthur, in his strategy, goes behind enemy lines, fights both ways, and ends up pushing the North Koreans almost up to China. Does he win? Oh no, China decides to join the war, and they send over 200,000 troops. So now that the Chinese pour in, you end up with this ugly stalemate right along the 38th parallel. Well, MacArthur had a plan, a bit of a controversial plan to say the least. Now that the Chinese were all over here, North Korea was here, it was a stalemate along the 38th parallel. MacArthur wanted to use atomic bombs, and not just one, not just two. MacArthur wanted to drop 50 on North Korea and China. He wanted to lay a permanent radioactive belt kind of in the border between North Korea and China. So, yeah, this was a bit aggressive, and Truman ultimately fires him because he was like criticizing Truman for not wanting to drop 50 atomic bombs. So Truman then fires the World War II hero Douglas MacArthur, and what ends up is this nasty stalemate that really, stays on that 38th parallel for the next few years. So hopefully you understand something about that. This is what it looks like from 1950 to 1953. Again, North Korea invades South Korea, pushes all the way to right here. Here's MacArthur's daring invasion, pushing the lines almost to China. And then when the Chinese jump in, it's that stalemate along the 38th parallel. And when does this war end? You're probably thinking, hey, wait, I hear about Korea in the news today. Indeed it is. For a long time, for basically all of my life, I remember North Korea kind of flaring up, dropping a few bombs, possible talk of another entire war with them. Well, in fact, that 1953, it was only a ceasefire that was declared. So the war was technically still going on with a standoff on that 38th parallel, and we had 40,000 troops over there since 1953. So we were ready to fight at a moment's notice, and because of that, North Korea truly hated the United States. There were several kind of true and terrible stories of American atrocities that were committed during the war, and North Korea, of course, would exploit that and use it as the worst propaganda ever against the United States, suggesting that we're doing things like this. And again, there are two documented cases of a few massacres that were committed against civilians in North Korea. And again, once all that stuff was out, North Korea used it, ran with it, and painted the picture like death to America, tearing up the American flag. And again, look what this guy's doing. Here are another horrible picture suggesting that American troops are laughing as they're doing this. So when does it all kind of finally fizzle out? Does it ever fizzle out? Actually, yes. In 2018, things started to get significantly better. Where North Korea, South Korea, they met, they shook hands, they signed an agreement. And the United States with President Trump has also gone over to a number of summits trying to get them to get rid of their nuclear weapons. So this was in 2018. I believe President Trump and the Korean leader in 2019 had another meeting that did not go so well, where President Trump left it because they're still not really willing to give up their nuclear weapons. So it's a bit of an ongoing thing, but it's better than it was in 1953 and the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That was all very turbulent, where people thought we could go to war at any moment yet again. So still in the news, watch it. It'll probably be around for a while. Okay, back in the United States, you got to note this guy, McCarthy. Oh, history, confusing names. This is not Douglas MacArthur. This is Joseph McCarthy. Sorry, you're smart. You can figure this out. So we've got another Red Scare in the United States. And this Red Scare, it makes this first Red Scare look like nothing. Remember Mitchell Palmer, the mass hysteria after World War I? I taught you that one. The labor strikes, a few bombings, and then he deported several hundred alleged communists. So we've had a Red Scare in American history. This new Red Scare is 100 times bigger than this one. This new Red Scare, we fear that, oh no, communists are taking over everywhere. Is this tomorrow, America under communism? And we actually established loyalty review boards where if you work for the government, you have to sign an oath promising that you're not a communist. So me, teacher, I work for the government, I would have had to sign an oath promising that I am loyal to the United States and I'm not a communist. In addition, the government creates this HUAC, which stands for the House of Un-American Activities Committee. They host these televised trials where they interrogate alleged communists. And you get a few big names that emerge from this where they're basically going to ask anyone and everyone if they're a communist, if you had been to the Soviet Union, if you even acted in like a Soviet film. They will interrogate you in public and ask you all sorts of questions about your possible communist past or current affiliation. So yes, we're scared to say the least. Loyalty boards, HUAC. Are we finding any communists? You'll see. But we've got a number of things that make it illegal to even be a communist now. And are you thinking free speech, Constitution? Does that protect you to say what you want, believe what you want? Not if you're a communist. So first we get this thing, the Smith Act, which makes it a crime to essentially be a communist. The act made it a crime to call for the overthrow of the US government, which we said that's what communists were trying to do. A court case upheld this, again, showing the First Amendment free speech doesn't exactly apply in times of crisis. We also get the McCarthy Act. This, again, made it illegal for communists to come into the United States. We had the belief that communists were planning a totalitarian dictatorship, and you can't be a communist, you can't come to the United States. Now ask yourself, are we finding a ton of communists? Yeah, we found a couple, but it's not like your next door neighbor was a communist. This is kind of the extent of the list of all the communists that we definitely found and prosecuted. This guy, Alger Hiss, he was like in the Roosevelt organization in the 1930s, and he was convicted of being a spy, but the Freakout Factor was truly magnified with Alger Hiss, because when they searched his property, they found these like pumpkin papers, these pieces of paper hidden in a pumpkin patch in his yard. So now everyone's like, oh, what else are they hiding? Is there microfilm? Is there this? Is there that? So yes, we caught this guy. And here again, pretty bad, a Manhattan Project scientist who gave atomic bomb secrets to the Soviets. And then there's this nice looking old couple, the Rosenbergs, who were also caught and convicted and ultimately executed. So how many people are we finding? 4. How many do we investigate and interrogate? Just about everyone. So understand that, we're totally scared about this. And, these people, when we find them, especially this kind of nice looking old couple, we start to believe that every single person is a communist. There are the pumpkin papers, Alger Hiss. That guy look familiar to you? That's Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was one of the HUAC Red Hunters. That's kind of how he got, his claim to fame. Great political cartoon depicting this whole thing, the HUAC, Committee on Un-American Activities. Check out what it's doing. Terrorizing the streets, running over people, smashing that lady up against the wall. But oh, it's okay. We're hunting communists. We broke his legs and, ran over this crowd of people. But it's okay. We're hunting communists. You see the satire, the sarcasm. Hopefully you understand it. This guy, make sure you note Joseph McCarthy. Again, the era is called McCarthyism. Now, this guy bursts onto the scene with his famed no evidence wheeling speech, where he holds this piece of paper up. And he's basically like, oh, on this piece of paper, I've got a list of 200 people in the State Department, in the American government, who I know are communist. Well, yeah, he never showed that piece of paper to anyone, never gave any names, but he freaks everyone out because people think, oh no, there's communists in our government. This congressman just said so. But again, he's known to just make these blanket accusations without backing it up with any evidence. So it's called McCarthyism, just blindly accusing someone of a crime, or they even call it witch hunting. You'll see the connection in a second. So just accusing someone of a crime without evidence. What's this cartoonist saying? Due to the crazy Red Scare hysteria, what's about to be extinguished? Oh, Lady Liberty's flame. Our freedom will possibly be taken away due to this communist, craziness. Look at this one. This is a teacher. This teacher reads books and taught about the Soviet Union, so now she's going to be investigated. And that was actually true. A number of teachers who were knowledgeable about it, maybe they traveled to the Soviet Union in the past, they could be investigated. And oftentimes people would just not like the weird person down the street. So when it came time to accuse someone, you're like, oh yeah, that person over there, I think they're a communist. And you could almost destroy their lives by alleging that they're a communist. Teachers, professors, again, they get accused. And maybe the more fascinating part of this is Hollywood actors even get accused. Now, Hollywood actors by nature are a little bit dramatic, yes. They don't want to answer the questions when the government starts to say, are you a communist? Do you have any communist ties? Have you been to the Soviet Union? Well, these Hollywood actors are like, I'm not going to answer your question. I can do what I want to. So a lot of these Hollywood actors end up being arrested and blacklisted where they can never work again. They made a movie about this. It's pretty good, but it just shows how far-fetched things are getting with so many people being accused of being communist. They're the famed Hollywood 10. Even good old Walt Disney had to appear between HUAC. These are the actors that would never act again for their, just non-cooperation with HUAC. Eventually, this McCarthy guy, he goes off the deep end and accuses Eisenhower and the army of being communist. And get this, they even accuse the Boy Scouts of being communist. So it's at that point where people realize, yeah, you might be a little bit out there. And he's kind of dismissed of being a bit of an extremist. But there he is. Again, he riles up everyone in this anti-communist craze and eventually fizzles out. But the fear does remain. So just understand McCarthy, McCarthyism, notable kind of ugly point in American history with this huge fear of everyone and your neighbor being a communist. How many did we find? Yeah, like 4. So how many did we accuse? A whole lot more. Anyway, have you seen this play? Maybe. Tom Ball has put it on in the past. Maybe you had to read this in an English class. But the Crucible, it was written in the 1950s by Arthur Miller, set in 1680s, 1690s Salem, depicting the witch trials. But this is actually an allegory for the Red Scare that's going on in the 1950s. So people kind of in the know would watch this thinking, hey, that's going on right now, when he's kind of telling the story of the Salem witch trials. Very similar to the Red Scare of the 1950s. In terms of our bomb, fear, paranoia, World War III, nuclear war, fallout, we're truly scared. This also escalated the fear when they launched Sputnik into the sky. Sputnik was just this little satellite. You could see it, there it is, rotating around. But we truly freak out when the Soviets do it because we were notably behind them. We couldn't even get a rocket off the ground. So the Soviets do this, and yes, it is just a little ball that, kind of navigates the Earth, but we're thinking, what could they do? Could they launch nuclear weapons from this? So we start to play catch up. We passed the NDEA, National Defense Education Act, which pumps millions and millions of dollars into public education. And we also create NASA, which I think you're familiar with. My question is always, why do we do this? It's because of Sputnik. Have you ever seen the movie October Sky? I think, 8th grade, they always used to show October Sky. I think Homer Hickam was the kid's name. These little, I think, West Virginia coal mine kids, they enter into rocket competitions. Why is there a competition? Why is there a scholarship at the end of it? It's because of NDEA. In the opening scene, they show Sputnik, the kids, the parents all are freaking out. So maybe you could watch that in your extra time at home. I'll show you this video. I'll have to attach a link. If I were in my class, I'd just press play, but YouTube won't let me do that. So This is how you protect yourself in case of nuclear war. You'll see what Bert the Turtle will advocate. You just duck and cover, and then surely you'll be safe underneath your desk. Yeah, you'll see the video in a second. There they are, safe, protected from a nuclear bomb, which, keep in mind, incinerates anything within, I don't know, 20, 30 square miles, and then you get like 1,000-mile-an-hour firestorm coming at you. But they're probably safe, huh? Think about what school was like back in the day. You got to recognize, ooh, is that an H-bomb or a tornado? And you're like looking out at the sky, so you have some anxiety, and they're like, oh no, is that an H-bomb? So yeah, there's a whole lot of fear that's prevalent in the 1950s, and you'll kind of see what happens with this fear. Some people totally freak out, and some people will just start to rebel. We kind of will have to continue that next week, but just understand there was a lot of fear and anxiety in the 1950s. A lot of people are building bomb shelters. Um, couldn't really do that in Texas with the whole sea level thing, but I remember stories from my mom and grandparents in Michigan where somebody on the neighborhood block would build a bomb shelter, and they would do trainings once a month of like all the kids going into the bomb shelter. And my mom was, like 8 or 9 years old, and she was just, totally scared, thinking, well, why aren't any of the parents coming in? Why are just the kids going into the bomb shelter, thinking about, life under nuclear war? So yeah, that could scare a generation, huh? Maybe you got grandparents that lived through this. Just kind of ask them if they remember all of this fear, this paranoia, the bomb shelters, duck and cover, Bert the Turtle, and they might be able to enlighten you. So you got corporations developing that can have you quarantine in your bomb shelter. And again, as we're all kind of quarantining now, well, look at that quarantine. Kind of close quarters, huh? And yeah, there's no phone, there's no internet. You got a couple books and some canned food where you would have to, I don't know, tough it out for 30, 60 days in case of nuclear war. If you guys ever seen the movie Blast from the Past, you might like that one if again you have some time to kill. Blast from the Past. It's this family that lived in their bomb shelter and they came out like 30 or 40 years later. It's kind of funny. This one's weird. Front page of Life magazine. That was a newly married couple that decided to honeymoon in their bomb shelter, and they had all of their supplies. So interesting stuff with the fear, the paranoia, the stuff going on in the 1950s. Hopefully you got some of it. I'm going to provide a few video clips, just kind of like I did yesterday, with some questions that are going to be added. Again, let me know if you have any questions, if you have any concerns. This is my last lecture for the week. Tomorrow I'm going to post a video with other questions, and Friday I'll do a similar quiz. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow in getting those last few quizzes back to you, but most of you should have it back by this point, where you have some feedback of how you did on World War II. Again, let me know if you have any questions, concerns, and have a nice afternoon.